being part of this session to be introducing, Mr. Prakash, who indeed is a master storyteller, and I have had the privilege of listening to his stories and telling my own story, which I will come to very soon. But let me go through the formal introduction of Mr. Prakash, and then also share a little bit about my own experience of working with him at multiple levels. So bear with me. It's not possible for me to be memorizing his entire bio, so I will read it out and then share with you my uh, acquaintance with Mr. Prakash. So Mr. Prakash Sheshadri is the CEO, Sea Change India. He is a widely read person and brings with him a rich blend of work, business, management, and leadership experience of over 35 years, 3.5 decades. He is a nationally acclaimed author, coach, master storyteller, keynote speaker, an organizational turnaround expert, and nation builder. I have had the privilege of reading at least three of his books, by the way. He has been writing on human behavior, business success, and many other related topics for over 2 decades now. He has 10 books published to his credit in several languages, and he has authored more than 1,000 articles on self development, spirituality, and varied topics. This book, Spiritual CEO, is based on his understanding of Indian mythology, corporate life cycles, and how it connects to the leadership and organizational shifts that are globally happening. He is an avid reader, has been practicing heartfulness meditation since 1992, and is a certified heartfulness trainer. Thanks to the various roles he plays in his corporate life and Heartfulness Institute, he has a great exposure in interfacing with humans from across the world. He is the secretary to Daji, the global guide, who is the president of Heartfulness Institute. So, this is who we have as the speaker for this evening, and also the one who takes us through the book that he has authored. But I have known Mr. Prakash for the last, going by the CV, last 1.5 decades, I would say, about 15 years. More from the ICICI days as a trainee, because he is a trainer for ICICI Bank at that point in time, continues to be so, if I'm right. But then my intimate interactions with him started in 2010 or so, when he became my executive coach when I was the CEO of IFMR Rural Channels and Services, and that's where, being first time CEO, his entrepreneurial experiences, because he has had a business prior to becoming a coach, and also the ability to look at everything from the balcony, as they say, not on the dance floor. He gave so much of insights to me from being not connected with the day to day, and gave me that wonderful sounding board, which I really cherish. What started as a couple of months engagement actually stretched for about 2.5 years, if I'm right. And I wish we get back to those sessions once again, Mr. Prakash, at some point in time. This book, Spiritual CEO, came to me as a manuscript. I had the privilege of going through it, and it was akin to what they say, fish taking to water, because a CEO, an entrepreneur, a coach, getting into bringing the principles of Indian mythology to sharing with the leadership team here, and it was so wonderfully interconnected, interwoven, as they say, and we are all privileged to be seeing this book now on the stands. In fact, to an extent where we at Samunati have ordered about 200 copies of this book, so that we can share this knowledge with many like-minded CEOs who come visit Samunati's office, or when we go and visit them. It would be a wonderful gift to share, is how we have looked at it. So on that note, Mr. Prakash, over to you to talk about uh, you know the karma quotient and the business dimension, the topic for the evening. And I would request the audience to post your questions on the chat box, so that after 25-30 minutes of Mr. Prakash's talk on the book, we can take up the questions. So over to you, Mr. Prakash.
Thank you, Mr. Anil. Thank you, all the members of TAI and the invitees who are part of this session. I'll take the writer's liberty to walk around a bit and then come to the topic. Of course, it kindled a lot of my memories when Mr. Anil was speaking about the journey we have had together in the last 1.5 decades. Similar are the experiences I have with several executives, C-suite coaches, C-suite executives, CEOs, business owners, leaders, and even some people from the government. All this gave me perspectives, and maybe the pandemic became the right time for me to explore connecting all the dots. For myself, it seemed to make sense when I started putting the book together as to why all along I had not been writing. Maybe the platform wasn't yet set and people are open to listen. Let me start with a very famous quote which I like from Nelson Mandela. He writes something like this: what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. It's a wonderful quote which forms the basis of some of the points that I want to share. I also want to share a little bit about how the book evolved, though the knowledge had been building up inside over a period of time. Just prior to the pandemic, we had been traveling extensively, which is part of my job. I meet clients and talk to them, help them turn around their organizations, etc. But when the pandemic hit and we were about to be grounded just 1 week prior to the first Janata lockdown, a few of us had got together uh, and a few friends and a few like-minded people, good-hearted people. We are just having a cup of coffee, as they say, and anything can happen over coffee, one of the famous slogans. And the thought evolved where people were prodding me, saying that though it had happened 100 years ago, the Spanish flu and whatever, people have forgotten. Not many who have seen that are living today, maybe not even one. And hence, humanity has to literally go back to the roots. What is the pandemic telling us? Is it really telling us something, or is there something beyond that we are missing? What is it exactly? And then the concept of writing a book came, and then the topic of the spiritual CEO fell in place. Why a spiritual CEO is always a question people ask me. Why not a spiritual executive? Why not a spiritual homemaker? Why not a spiritual student? Let me maybe put it this way. Though the book is meant for anyone who is looking for a paradigm shift into areas hitherto not explored by many. Predominantly, I took the concept of a spiritual CEO mainly for a simple reason of getting the focus. And second, if you take any corporate, any MSME, even governments, you take the Prime Minister of India or the President of any large country, they all influence thousands and thousands by that one sheer word that they utter, or that one tweet that they make, or that one YouTube that they come out with. People galvanize around their thoughts. They tend to flock to what they say. So if there is a message to take to, the question was, would you keep hitting stone against each fruit? Or would you take that one stone with which you can hit 1,000 or more fruits at a time? I thought the best way was, at least to start with, create that ripple effect by dropping the stone not at the edge of the pond, but in the middle of the pond, where the ripple tends to flow across. And hence we took, or I took, the topic of influencing the thinking of a CEO. If the CEO's thinking is influenced, and if they're ready to mold how the organizations and corporates work without compromising on the fundamental premise for which a business is built, as Peter Drucker would say, the fundamental purpose of business is to generate profit. if there is a better way to generate profit, which will surely hook a CEO or an investor in, yet evolve a set of thought processes which would stand humanity in this crisis, or for that matter, any crisis into the future, which is likely to hit us. No crisis is going to come announced. While conspiracy theories are going around, whether it's man-made or bat-made and all that, it's still anyway made and it's happening. We have to face it. No war is automatic. It's all some way a decision of somebody. Whatever happens, finally, few perspective. If I can create that positive ripple effect, I thought the right place to start with is a set of great hearts and great minds, which I call as the CEO. If they see value, they tend to inspire, because we all come from the basic human culture of aping and learning. In childhood, we copied our parents. When we are growing up, we copied our teachers. As we moved into the adolescent age, we were copying people, our neighbors or our heroes on the screen or whoever. And a CEO with whom you tend to spend majority of your time in the organization, directly or otherwise, would be the right set of people to influence. And I thought the first ripple is to write a book. For meeting each of the CEO and telling them about what my views on these concepts are, why is it needed, is going to take one hell of a time. But I thought much easier if you just make a book, make it available. Of course, then the choice of buying and reading becomes theirs. And when a CEO reads the book and starts implementing whatever he or she believes is right, there is no sense of feeling that somebody is telling me to do something. That is the power of a book. It's sort of a very soft invasion into a thinking pattern. Book writers have this uncanny ability of influencing you without telling you so. And the best way to do it is normally by storytelling. Right from a childhood, we all love stories. And that's why I chose the platform of connecting all the big learning through these stories. And nothing like mythology, specifically Indian mythology, from where I picked up a lot of known and unknown stories. Let me go back a bit on why I chose some of the topics in this book, which apparently might look out of place, even though I keep mentioning in the book throughout that if we don't compromise on the fundamental premise of running a business to make profit, nowhere do I suggest in the book. But I do make suggestions to look something beyond. When you move to second, third, fourth, fifth standard in a school, doesn't mean you've forgotten your first standard. It is the fundamental syllabus on which your entire future is built, that ABCD that you learn, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the numbers that you learn form the basis. So we are never going to give up one of the fundamental premise of the business, which is to make profits. But look at building on top an edifice which looks far better than a simple plain stone for which we all crave for, what I would call as business profits or top line. Some of the concepts I share in this book, I have debated a lot with many CEOs, including Mr. Anil, who has read the scripts. Okay, there are a lot of points we resonate with, so it was easier for him to accept. Many of the CEOs with whom I had shared this concept, including Westland, the publishers, initially there were always questions. Of course, they were quite pragmatic in taking this and moving on, which is Westland is an Amazon company, as you know. I have two examples here to connect as to why some of the concepts might appear to be out of the box today, but would become relevant. In fact, they have become relevant, except that we don't see it. Let me first share the movie, which many of you might have seen about 15, 20 years ago. It was more a documentary, a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? Where there's a young black boy who appears in a basketball court. That's how the movie starts. And many of the things that we don't understand in life, how it is linked back to quantum. In fact, on this topic, about 3 months back, I gave a talk. And when I prepared for the talk, it was amazing as to how about 5, 6 frameworks in this world, which are least accepted, are actually shaping our lives without our knowledge. and add to that today KQ or karma quotient. That is something which you will not be able to alter, whether you like it or not. Going to the next dot, which I want to connect. Some of you might remember this sequence I'm going to share. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. Does this series make ring any bell? It's famously known as the Fibonacci series. When I was initially reading in my school days about this series, or maybe in my college days, I was wondering what the hell they are. I mean, some crazy numbers. What does it make a difference whether you learn this or not? Subsequently, when I was reading several research papers on this Fibonacci pattern, I'm just taking one example. How it roots back to the value of pi for each number, the 22 bar 7. How many of the architectures in the world, including some of the patterns of the universe, are easily explained using something called as Fibonacci series. The basic, I would say, premise of our mind works either forward or backward. We want to go ahead and create something, and then we start thinking forward. Or we want to defend a thesis, why this is happening, and then we work backwards. For example, the Big Bang. Though even today, there are a lot of people who don't accept the concept, they still sort of indirectly agree there should have been there. There should have been a cause for the effect to be here. The cause of the creation for the effect of the expansion of the universe that we see today. Fibonacci series, or the quantum physics, or the creation of the universe. Many of the things, just because we don't understand them, they cannot be wished away. I was very surprised to watch a video last week on YouTube forwarded through our standard social media channel handle WhatsApp. It was about a scientist or a set of scientists who are looking at the current state of human beings. And they landed back into checking the story of Lord Krishna and the Mahabharata and the shift of the yugas, right from the creation of the first yuga to the last one, which is the Kali Yuga. They found out, surprisingly, though they are not able to prove it conclusively, that Lord Krishna's destruction had a reason, because this exactly happened at the time of creation of Kali Yuga. And he came with the purpose of destroying all that knowledge which should have been detrimental in the hands of the people who are going to come in Kali Yuga, which is 5,000-10,000 years ago, whatever. Whether it's Satya Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, all that knowledge apparently were 1,000x, 10,000x, 1,000,000x of what human beings know. And he came apparently with a sole purpose. And this is not a fiction. You can go ahead and check in the YouTube. It's gaining millions of views. They have found out, they have hypothesized that he did that so that the entire humanity who had all that knowledge was wiped out. And the people who are not fit to receive, which are going to be part of the Kali Yuga, he didn't want them apparently. It doesn't matter whether your faith is Hinduism or Christianity, or each of the faith has stories which speaks about. If you go into the Christian faith, they speak about Atlantis. Like that, you have stories everywhere. And he apparently wiped out the memory of all this knowledge, and humans had to start all over again. And he didn't want them to have this because the current set of humans won't know how to handle. But unfortunately, in the last 100 years of the Industrial Revolution, somehow we have landed up getting access to knowledge which apparently is slowly getting there. Slowly getting there, not yet there, but slowly getting there, where it will prove detrimental if we do not look at making certain adjustments. And these are the adjustments which humans will have to understand. Normally, when you write a book, though I'm not just a writer, I also have the experience of running a few organizations and also coaching hundreds and hundreds of organizations to become successful. I always ask people, is it wrong to dream? Is it wrong to be in minority when you hold a view which you believe will give an impact which might be the game changer? Maybe, may not be, we don't know. every point of life is a yoke. You come to a point, you have to go left or you have to go right. And that is a changing point. Maybe this book could be that changing point where you go left or right, depending upon whether you have the guts to dream, whether you want to be what I call as a minority leader to start with. Every major change in the world, every major shift in the world, every major invention in the world, every major innovation in the world, every CEO started as an executive, like what Mr. Anil started as an executive in a bank. He had a dream. He was having the guts to break away from the rigmarole of walking to a bank in the morning, getting out in the evening. He became an entrepreneur. Initially, he just had one or two people behind him. Today, he has hundreds and he has a huge organization. The same is true for every CEO who is watching this today, every TiE Chennai member. You were a minority leader when you initially started, with a lot of doubts, a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, a lot of question marks on whether you will be able to do this or not. Yet, you are here today. The same is true if you look at the movie called Pursuit of Happiness. One of my favorite movies. I play in many of my leadership sessions and debrief for a period of 2 days slowly. Will Smith Sr. and Will Smith Jr. How he starts his life in a car and how he goes on to become what he is in the Wall Street market. All that based on that one single dream and that one single thought that his thought can make a difference. And that is the thought that I had in coining the word karma question, which I believe has powerful influence as we go along. If you look at the way in which humans work on setting goals, whether it's for personal, professional, organizational, business growth, we all have ambitious goals. We all have aspirational goals. To quite simply put, ambitious goals are those where you're looking at acquiring things, which are normally materialistic in nature, more turnover, more profits, a better home, a private jet, whatever it may be. Depending upon the level you are, whether you're working as an executive, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are in the Fortune 100, Forbes list, whatever you want to call. Ambition is what drives or fuels financial growth. But aspirational goals are what fuels human growth. And without human growth, financial goals will never be achieved. If you look at the theory of Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs, which was published somewhere 78 years ago in the 40s, he spoke about the survival needs at the bottom of the pyramid, and at the top he was speaking about the self-actualization needs. And self-actualization needs are not necessarily needs which are related to finance. For example, aspirational goals are normally what I want to become, not what I want to acquire. I want to be the change leader where I would impact the world at its best. My changes should affect the world at its, to make it go to the best. For example, if that's a dream or a goal I have, the ambitious goals become a subset. Ambition is absolutely no wrong. Without money as a mode of exchange, many of the things that we are currently using to communicate, to run the world, will not happen, may not happen rather. But what fuels is the power to think something big and let it achieve, let it unfold. If it is positive, you become like what some of the great people in the world have become. If it's negative, you become a Hitler or a Mussolini or a terrorist, doesn't matter. It's still an aspiration, but a negative one. Hence, the book that I have given is all about aspirational goals where ambitious goals become a subset. I don't discount them. I do fully understand the power of economy for anything to be accepted in the first place. My guru used to say that unless you're a rich man, you can't say that having money is useless. When it comes from maybe the wealthiest person in the world, people will listen and accept. And maybe that's the reason why people turn to philanthropy when they really earn a lot of money, because they understand that there is an aspiration for which they have to move on beyond what they have earned. And how do we do all this? If you look at the topic that I've taken, say, karma quotient, we all understand, specifically Indians, karma as both the cause and the effect. Karma is an input, karma is an output as well. But if you really look at the definition of karma, every karma is created by one single thought. If that thought is in place, if it is aligned to a positive shift in the world, you let a positive karma take place. See, it is quite easy to say it's possible to live without creating karma. For that, maybe we have to become Lord Krishna or become at least like Lord Krishna, including the practice I do, heartfulness meditation, which me and Mr. Anil practice, speaks about that. But while we go towards that process, we still are undoing our bank accounts of the karma that we already created from the past, at least from the time of birth. All the thoughts in my head, which are fructifying into action and producing consequences, while it is giving me certain results on the ambitious and aspirational front, it is also fueling further ripples, which I cannot stop. I cannot be swimming in a pond, dabbling around without expecting some kind of a trigger mechanism taking place, where the water starts reverberating with my strokes and moving around. The same is true. While doing this, can we ensure that the reverberation is positive? The reverberation does not impact the people who are actually part of making the organization what it is. Let's look at a fundamental question. While every CEO or business leader would strive for good top line and profits, let's just reverse the equation and ask, what would my people who are my stakeholders, my employees, whatever you want to call, what are they looking for? With a little bit of research and putting that research together, I have arrived at a very simple concept with which you can build a home, with which you can build a company, you can build an organization, you can build a school or a university, you can build a nation, what I call as peace, happiness, and growth coming together, which is what makes a spiritual bottom line. Every human being wants peace. I can have any amount of money I want, all the comforts I want. If I'm not going to be peaceful, it's of no consequence to me. I can have all the money in the world that I can have access to, but if I'm not happy, would that be of any consequence? Would growth alone be of any use? Even the CEOs whom I have coached, hundreds of them, privately when I talk to them, they all say, finally, Prakash, at the end of the day, when I hit the bed, I want to sleep peacefully. Surprisingly, many of them are on medications to go to sleep. When you ask them why, you say, the pressure of having to perform. I said, it's your creation. Yes, I know, but I've caught a tiger by its tail. What do I do? So a karma quotient, if you're looking at it, fundamentally has three aspects that a CEO or a business leader will have to manage, which is what I explained in different ways in the book. You have to ensure peace for yourself. You have to ensure peace for the people who are with you. You have to ensure happiness for yourself. You have to ensure happiness for your own people, balancing them with growth. Many of the CEOs who are watching the program, specifically some of the stalwarts of TiE Chennai, would surely be aware of the triple bottom line. The triple bottom line is when you speak about people, you speak about profit, you speak about planet. Balancing the three, which is what is in vogue in the world for the last 15, 20 years at least. The spiritual bottom line takes it a little bit differently. The growth combines the three P's, which is your planet, profit, and the people. Adding to that two more, the P and the H, which is nothing but peace and happiness. If you are consciously doing this in your organization, whenever I speak with many of the CEOs who I coach, their focus is on the absolute present of having to get rid of the stocks or increase the market share or improve the EPS or improve the PAT or whatever, EBITDA, whatever you want to call. forgetting that they are hitting the costs all the time. That's why in this book I speak about the costs. They are focusing on the effect, what you would call, if you really look at as the lag indicators. If you look at implementing balanced scorecard in your organization, which many of you might have done, you have the lag indicators, which are the results, which are nothing but the effects. The lead indicators, which are the inputs, that's where karma starts. If you keep your people happy and peaceful, it is a known fact that they, at a subconscious thinking level, allow their thoughts to be positive, the workplace becomes positive, and hence growth literally becomes incidental. It is almost a given. You don't really need to. There is one single aspect that I'd like to share here as to an advantage humans have over any other species, what we call as viveka, the ability to discriminate. While there are several theories about viveka, where people speak fundamentally about your ability to differentiate between good and bad, right and wrong, there is a very subtle definition which our global guide Taji has given. He talks about viveka as your ability to differentiate between cause and effect. While we are all looking at bad and good, right and wrong, left or right, up or down, which are nothing but finally effects, he speaks about, which I have also experienced working at several organizations. While problem solving, after all, what do we teach our executives in the organization? We tell them focus on the root cause, don't focus on the symptoms. Likewise, Viveka, true Viveka, if you're able to implement, you will understand that true Viveka is your ability to discriminate between the cause and the effect, where the cause is nothing but the first stage of karma, which is the input. If that input is regulated on these three fundamental parameters, which makes up the karma quotient, which is nothing but the need for peace, the need for happiness, and the need for growth. Three balanced, not one compromised against another. Automatically, you'll find that the effect starts coming in. It is a measurable index. KQ is not something which is hanging in the air, defining or rather defying any explanation. It is something doable. And this is the role of the CEO to focus on the cause. This is something that you have to look at the cause. And if you're able to focus on the cause you will find that the effect, which is the growth or the peace or happiness, automatically happens. Do we tap into this unlimited potential of Viveka at every moment, which is a choice we have to make? This is what leads us to excellence. Let me share this definition after a minute or so. I'll close off this talk to move into question and answers. For me, my personal definition of excellence is something like this. Excellence, when you consistently exceed the expectations of my own and that of others. Let me repeat it for you. Excellence is when you consistently exceed the expectations of my own and that of the other. And when they are aligned to the values, which creates an egregore or a group thought, as they say, it takes you to the next levels of comprehension, which maybe Lord has taken away from us, or some distraction has taken away from us, whatever you want to call. If you're able to do that, and if you're able to focus, business success, which currently is measured as profits and financial growth, will take a quantum leap into next level, where we understand that everything starts with a thought. Everything is a karma, both from the input and output perspective. Everything we have a choice of having a viveka, and if it is displayed properly, we can have a good amount of influence on the input, and thereby to a great extent have an influence on the output as well. And hence, if you really look at it, KQ or karma quotient is controllable, and you can define business success to include peace, happiness, and growth, a triangulation of three major aspects. With that, I would stop this keynote address and pass it back to our moderator, Mr. Anil. Thanks for listening till now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prakash, for just going in a flow and covering a lot that is already in the book. Just wanted to check with Priya, do you have questions being collated on the other channels where this is being
Yeah,
telecast?
we are doing it parallelly.
If you can put that, or
Sure.
if either of you or Saurav can help collate those and
Sure.
share it on my chat or ask the question, it would be helpful. Do we have questions already? Because there is nothing on the chat.
There is
Yeah.
one, so I'm just sharing.
Okay, so if you can just share on the chat, then okay. Just put the name of the person who has asked the question if it is possible.
One Mr. Jawahar who is raising his hand. Would you like to unmute him and make a question?
That's something that the host will have to look
Yeah,
at.
yeah. I am asking Priya to check if.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, please, sir.
Okay, sir. Sir, this is Jawahar from Coimbatore. Sir, my question, you spoke about peace, growth, happiness all together. But in any business, the pressure invariably comes at some point from your customers, right? On-time delivery, and then payments. You have to make payments to your vendors. So all this pressure, even though you don't want it, it comes on the head of CEO invariably, right? And things like COVID and unexpected things really add salt to the injury. So how do you tackle when the pressure, even though you don't want it, it comes automatically, when you expand the business, things like that.
Thanks for that very interesting question. I'll give you two perspectives that just pops up as you're asking. One, let's assume that, say, maybe you can mute yourself. It will be easy to.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Assuming I am on a 30-feet tree at somewhere in the middle to the top, which is my current financial status of the organization. And there is another tree which is 200 feet up, which seems to promise a lot of things for me to. So I can't jump from the current tree to get on to that tree. The tree is promising, but to get onto the tree, there is one thing that I surely have to do. I have to climb down the current tree, walk up, do all that I have done to do what I have climbed to half of the current level of the tree to move up and further up. It is a conscious choice every CEO or business owner will have to take. Do you want to, you see, many of us get into comfort zone once we start doing what we are doing, and we don't want to do something differently just because it doesn't suit our convenience anymore. So it's a call you have to make. Option two, let me give from a family perspective. Many of us who have grown through a family of joint family system, we all know there are multiple roles played in our family. Father is a strict disciplinarian who wants us to study well, come back on time, things like that. And then you will find that your mother, who is someone who gives you everything what you need, she knows exactly when you need it. When father is angry, she will still let you in through the house back door, let you sort of sneak into your room. The role of a CEO is like the role of a father, mother, sister, brother, grandfather, uncle, all rolled together. You bear the brunt. See, if you look at the role of Lord Krishna in the war between, I have mentioned about this in the book also, between Pandavas and Kauravas. The arrows were being fired by Pandavas, but actually the war was being fought by Krishna without raising his finger even once to either throw his chakra or an arrow. Because he was able to do that multiple role, fortunate or unfortunate, the level of what you are as a business leader, there are certain decisions which you have to bite, take, chew, and grow up. Others, as they say, once you grow up the ladder, people will throw stones at you, and of course, they'll also give bouquets. If you need one, you have to be ready for the other. And it is a difficult call. Finally, I always say, you can take the horse to the water. Choice is still with the horse to drink the water or not. The same way the changes I have implemented in several organizations. Mr. Anil is also an example of having implemented many of these things in his own organization. I have interacted with many of his team members in IFMR as well as in Samanati. That is work pressure, but it's sort of a positive, enjoyable work pressure that we all have. It's like what the Indian cricket team is going through. They know they have reached the finals of the World Cup. It's just one step away. But so what if they don't make it? The world doesn't end there. I hope I have given you two perspectives which would give some insights to answer your question, Mr. Java. Thank you. Mr. Prahlad Rao.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Prakash. Mr. Prahlad Rao has a question and also has his hand up. If Priya can unmute him, he can perhaps ask the question directly. Is it possible, or may I read?
He can unmute himself. But I think he's
Mr.
not.
Rao, you may want to just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Okay, I have done it. Good evening,
evening.
Prakash ji and Anil sir. My question, or is a kind of a thought I'm getting in my mind. The three aspects of peace, happiness, and growth. Peace, happiness in the context of an organization or a whatever, the group entity. It is a somewhat interdependent thing. It is not a completely individualistic thing. And to a large extent, what is in the growth may decide, the level of peace and happiness in a group or a corporate environment. I'm just wondering whether, how to reconcile this, because the growth has to be to an extent where it brings in the group, peace and happiness. And of course, the other challenge is also, sometimes, what's desirable in the long term has certain pains in the short term, and it requires certain sacrifice. Whether the whole group, is in for it, they're agreeable, are they ready to take it? And especially at times where currently we are in, where there is no long term anymore, in many situations, people are so short term oriented, companies are so short term oriented. Would you kindly kind of help me to understand this better, sir?
I'm happy with both your question, Mr. Prahlad Rao, and also Mr. Jawahar, for a simple reason. I remember Einstein's quote when both these questions came up. Einstein's famous quote says that once you alter the thinking of a person, it's impossible for them to go back to the earlier form of thinking. What I have at least done in the last half an hour, I've already made both of you to think of peace, happiness, and growth as a possible objective, only wondering how to do it, which is far better than 45 minutes back. No? If you look at it, really, actually, I have put together a 2.5 hour webinar, which I'm doing this weekend, which actually shares the tools and techniques. This is a very short session where I'll not be able to dive deeper. There, I'm going to share tools and techniques for both short-term, mid-term, and long-term. It's almost the same topic. I'm doing a webinar this Sunday on 20th June. It is a possibility that you can marry all three. As I always say, we normally look from two possibilities, normal human tendency. The first is we look from what we call as theory of constraints. I look at everything around me and say why something is not possible. And that is the other form, which is what I call as minority leaders, less than 1% of the world. Surprisingly, this is the 1-2% who holds at least the financial wealth of this world. They look from the concept of theory of possibility. Nobody has done it before. Can I be the first one? You remember the famous story of the railroads expanding into Africa, or the gold rush of America, where people migrated from Europe. Those days, there were no flights. They went to Russia, they took Alaska, they walked down. Out of 100 walked, every 110 lost their lives. They finally came to the gold rush and they made that gold financial. But imagine the human endeavor and spirit that they went through to reach this. Financial benefits are not something that you achieve just by making a will, making a plan, and executing. People have to stand up. When will people stand up to you? When they have an alignment to you as a leader. Do you have the values? Will you back them up? People are consistently cross-checking you, your organization, to see if the values align with the goals that you are setting. Unfortunately, many of the leaders I come across initially have this confusion. Should I set the goals and align my values, or should I set my values and align my goals? The jury is still out, but if you ask me, I would vote for values coming first and goals aligning to that. For example, let me give you one simple example. My hands are clean, I'll be a straightforward administrator if you are in government service. That's your value. Then your goal will align to that. The other way around, if your goal is, I want to retire happily, I don't mind doing anything, as long as I have whatever in your life. So what happens now? Your goal overtakes the value. As far as you are concerned, both are right. But the karmic disturbance or the karmic threads that you leave in the air will come back and catch up with you at some point of time. This is something I've asked several executives. 8 out of 10 have consistently said, I would prefer a happy sleep over a troubled day. It's up to you to take a call, Mr. Prahlad.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. The third question is from Rajiv Kaimal. I'll read it out for you. We live in a consumerist world. The current economy theory that drives the world is based on consumerism. It is believed that the economy can thrive only if there is more and more consumption, which is the exact opposite of any spiritual theory, because all spiritual theory talks about minimalism. So how do we fix this dichotomy, or rather strike a balance? He's asking your thoughts on consumerism versus minimalism, Mr. Prakash.
Thank you, Mr. Rajiv. I remember the meetings we had several years back. It's good to have you on the show today. See, spirituality as a school depends on how you look at what spirituality is. In my definition, what I have learned over a period of time from several gurus, at least 2 gurus to be specific, I have my own definition of spirituality to begin with. This is not the end all, but at least take it as a building blocks. I define spirituality in a view that would guarantee peace, happiness, and growth of your choice in this world. The trouble comes when the growth, as I believe, is different from the growth that my organization believes. Let me ask you another question. For you to pluck the fruit from a tree, for you to consume, as you call, would you focus only on the tree, or would you look at the soil? Would you look at the trunk of the tree? Would you look at weeding out what is around the tree? Would you look at nurturing and curing? I was reading about a month back a concept note on how trees respond. This is something our own Chandra Bose has done experiment 80, 90 years ago. He almost was on the verge of getting a Nobel Prize for that. Trees respond to the way you talk to them. Water responds to the way you talk to them. If trees and water respond, you think people won't. Nowhere spirituality says, in fact, if spirituality's fundamental belief system is based on assuming for the existence of God, and if God is the one who was created, including your material wealth and all that, you think God is going to be cruel enough to say that you should not make money? Not at all. Nowhere is it said that making money is a sin. Let's get out of that mindset, because that's not what I teach when I turn around organizations or help organizations to turn around. Growth is a must. Whether it's 30% growth, 50% growth, 2x growth, that's up to you. But in that process, don't leave dead bodies behind, mental dead bodies behind. People today, if you look at some of the great places to work, kind of competitions are going all over the globe, their parameters are anything financial. It's all about values, how people work, do they really like the place that they're working, things like that. Financial compensation is less than 10% of the complete rating system. I'm sure that you know it, Mr. Anil knows it, all those who are watching would also know. Finally, the human mind is a very fickle mind, but one thing, be very certain, the world comes after my personal choice. World doesn't matter to me if it does not align to what I want. And I have met millions and millions of people in the last 3.5+ decades, and at least 90% plus, at some point of time, I put peace and happiness beyond money. I am not saying money is not to be made. It has to be made, loads and loads. Ensure you keep the other 2 quadrants in mind. Balance. If you look at an equilateral triangle where all sides are equal, if one side is skewed, it's no more equilateral. Likewise, peace, happiness, growth being equilateral, the sides of the equilateral triangle being bigger can ensure better growth on all 3 fronts. But surprisingly, data shows, research shows, I have read a lot of Harvard research papers, when you focus on people, whether you want to call peace or happiness, they automatically contribute to growth. Whereas when you push them to grow, I have spoken in confidence to several executives. They say, we feel, Prakash, we feel as if we are commodities in this company. I don't perform on quarter, I'm out. I don't perform one day, my MD calls and shouts at me, things like that. And there are people who give their life for organizations which literally put purpose over profit. The question that you asked, finally, the call is yours. In my view, it's something which works. I've seen it working in several organizations. It will continue to work. Thank you, Mr. Raj.
Actually, the next question is very similar to that. So I'll just go ahead with that. And after this question, Mr. Prakash, perhaps I have a question. If you can elaborate
Sure. Yeah.
little
Please.
on the spiritual alchemy that your book talks about. We'll come to that, but there is a question from Sandeep Tandon, linked to the previous answer. Spirituality is a concept which gets perfected over a period of time, long time. Whereas today's corporate world, especially the CXOs and CEOs, are under constant lens of investors. I'm reading out in verbatim, for day-to-day to quarterly effectiveness results. So how do you balance the contradicting things? One takes years, the other is focused on short-term, quarterly, monthly satisfaction / attainment. So a brief answer, continuation of the previous.
Ideally, I would say that I have covered almost 26 questions in the book on the same question in more detail. Every single detail on the impact on the P&L, the balance sheet. See, I'm not a person to be coaching CEOs if I tell them to make lesser profits. In fact, we do help them to make better turnover, better profits, expansion, growth, acquisition, mergers, whatever you want to call. I'm only saying, while doing that, can you also juggle around managing your people's peace of mind and keep them happy? Is it too much of an ask? If it is not possible, create a separate portfolio of 1 or 2 people who can do that for you. You focus, if you are the CEO, focus on the finance, focus on the finance. Create, for example, some organizations today have chief happiness officer. So many things are there. Make someone, after all, the post are there. Chief happiness officer is a well-known post today, CHO, CXO, whatever you want to call it. Delegate it. It's not essential the CEO has to do, no? It's something that you can outsource, delegate, and get it done. Nothing is stopping us. But again, I'm happy you're asking the question because you're now struggling between the need to do and how to do, which is a better question to have. I urge that you grab the book. At peace, you'll find several structured answers where I'm sharing exactly how this can be done.
Super. So Mr. Sri Ramachandran has his hand up as well as has a question here.
Yeah.
So we can do either of them. Priya, either you can unmute him or he can unmute and put his video on and ask. Mr. Sri Ramachandran?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. See, basically my question is, my experience working in different markets, different industries, we work among competitors who do not have concern for level of ethics that they have to go with. Though we follow ethical practices, it becomes difficult to grow our business in such a scenario, like motivating our own people in a market like that to have values in their heart when they move in and talk to the customers, right? So can you suggest what is the right approach or a way to address such a market to keep the company post a balanced growth?
Thank you. As the earlier questioner asked, these are done over a period of time. Some of these additions that you're going to do are not going to replace your current structure. Fortunately, it's like staying inside a house, still demolishing and rebuilding. It is very much possible. Nowhere do I suggest, nowhere do I openly advocate compromise on financial metrics, but value metrics, ethics metrics, it's a call for every organization to make. Many organizations I have consulted with have their own ethics committee, where they very clearly say, these things are non-negotiable, even if it means phenomenal growth in markets space which we didn't exist, we will not do because it doesn't meet our ethics standards. Then it's your own clarion call that you have to take over a period of time. I always give this story in many of my sessions. It's about a father who was making a cake of 10 kilo size. He called his son, said, I'm going to make the dough, I'm going to make this and all that. As he's about to put the cake in the oven, he takes about 5 grams of horse droppings. He's about to put it in the cake, and he asked the son, can I put it inside? No, no, Dad, how can you put it? It's not possible. He says, scientifically, 5 grams of horse dropping in a 10-kilo cake will not make any smell, make any difference to the taste, nor will it harm your body. No, no, I'm seeing it. No, Dad, how can you put it? It'll, when I take the cake, it will appear in my mouth, whether actually I'm able to taste it or not. Ethics is something like that. It's a horse dropping, whether you want to have it or don't want to have. It is a conscious choice you have to make. Heads will roll if you don't perform. All those things will happen. But finally, it's your call to decide. I have seen several organizations, they have certain non-negotiable values. I've even seen people like Azim Premji and some of these stalwarts from worldwide speaking on this. They said that any big contract, even L&T, I am told, any big contract, if these are the things we have to do to get this contract, sorry, we will not do because it goes against our ethics. They have grown. I've always seen once you take a stand and communicate to the world will adjust to your views at some point of time. But that is a hard grind you should be ready to take. See, that U-turn and taking another path out is always a difficult choice, because when things are running fine, why should I change? In fact, I would always advocate, how many of us, I don't think even one CEO in the world was capable of predicting the pandemic, including myself or the people on the show or even any of the top CEOs of the world. I don't think anyone predicted the pandemic. But when it was on your head, you had no choice but to change the way in which you're working. The same is true for many of these things. Today, I've sown the seed. It's already growing. Take some time. Take your own time. No issues. Whatever works, make a beginning. Let's all, as they say in Tamil, small drops make an ocean. Make the small adjustment. Slowly, it will grow. Thank you.
So to keep a little bit of gender diversity in the questions, we'll come to Yogesh very soon. Yogesh, just bear with us for a minute. There is a question from Madam Jayashree.
Yeah.
How do you erase your past karma wherein inputs were not proper? Past karmic impressions has the impact on present results.
There is a normal process. There is an accelerated process for this. The normal process in worldly terms, what Lord Krishna calls is every karma you have to go through the process of Bhog. Bhog is nothing but the seed being sown in the soil will have to germinate and you have to bear the consequences of the seeding. Whether it's a weed or a pineapple or a apple cider or whatever, you have to, what you sow you have to reap. But according to spiritual science, there are ways in which you can short circuit the karmic balance. It could be through prayer. It could be through certain spiritual practices. It could be through mental cleansing. It could be through heartfulness cleaning as we do. There is a possibility of, it's like a bank account. You need to either withdraw the money or just close the account and say, forget it, I don't need the balance at all. Both are possible for you to alter. One is a shorter route, one is a longer route. If you are smart, I would look at ways in which I can undo the past in one single stroke. I would rather explore ways for that. So that at least from now, your 5th grade, 10th grade answers, or rather the score sheets, you can't undo, but you can at least leave it out and continue to do what you're capable of doing to achieve something better from today. I hope partly it answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, then we have Yogesh. You can unmute and please go ahead. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you, sir. And it has been an amazing session, sir. I wanted to ask that as future leaders, what we see a trend now is the decision making at all levels is now being controlled by machines, and we have a strong focus on data. We have algorithms, we have machine learnings that is giving us a base of the decisions that we need to make. So in this age and in this development, how do we also have feelings from our heart, or we also have decisions that we make from our heart. So how does one manage both of these aspects?
So when you look at either machine-based decisions or human-based decisions, the final sign off still happens by a single individual. And this is where the key point comes, which I have shared in the book also, the concept called as free will. Humans normally are capable of demonstrating free will in their lives. But data shows that 97 to 98% of the time, we do not have our free will operating. So what happens? I have written an article about 7 months back on this called as the 100 people who influence our lives. Each 100 may be plus or minus. I just used a ballpark figure. Each and every one of us, you want to call it influence, you want to call it manipulation, you want to call it whatever. We are continuously fed by thoughts, impressions, ideas by people who are around us, the so-called well-wishers, my board members, the people who report to me, or my neighbor who comes with me for a walk in the morning, who puts, Mr. Anil, what do you think about financial inclusion for so-and-so sector? And he keeps saying for 5 days, Mr. Anil starts thinking about it without his knowledge. This happens all the time. This is where Viveka really helps. The true Viveka, because we all know that every decision is going to let loose a chain of consequences on which we have no control. It's like launching a rocket. Once done, it's over. You can look at whether its orbit is taking the apogee properly and putting the payload into the space, or it's going to fall off in the sea. But once the rocket is launched, it's gone. But till the rocket is launched, you have a choice of pausing, reflecting. If you look at Ashtanga Yoga, it speaks about dharana and pratyahara precisely for this. Our ancient people have thought a lot on this. Before doing anything, just withdraw your senses, go inside, meditate. My guru used to say, when you are in serious doubt that you are taking a key decision in somebody or something, the so-called supercomputer, which was invented in the future, there is a very short film in YouTube where they invent a supercomputer and then they go and ask it, is there a God? And it thinks and answers, yes, I am. The machines take over at some point of time in our life. But still, as of now, machines still are only processing a code that you write. Still, the final signing off has to happen, thankfully, by humans. Till that exists, keep sharpening your Viveka. I would only say the best time is right now to begin. Every decision that you have to make, ask yourself 2 times, 3 times, whatever way of introspection, meditation you have, go inside and ask yourself, what are the consequences which are going to flow out of this 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? 20 years ago, while doing a leadership session, I happened to browse a book. I found this quote, which I use in many of the sessions. A great leader is one who is able to look at 7 generations ahead while making a decision. A generation is roughly about 30 years. If you're making a decision, you have to look at what would this decision mean to the world 100, 200 years from now. How many of us do that? But is that option of looking available to all of us? Yes, of course it's available. At least from now on, you will think, so-and-so person, Prakash told me in that day that my decisions have a ripple effect for the next 100, 200 years. Imagine that one single decision Roosevelt took of dropping the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 80 years, even today it's being spoken about, a moment of madness. You think he would have thought through all this before deciding to drop the bomb? For him, it was an experiment that day to check what was the impact of the bomb. And maybe positively it helped bring NATO in place. It helped bring certain restrictions in place where you don't have nuclear rogue countries coming in, things like that. Sometimes wrong decisions will also help us learn if you're able to apply Viveka and go back. But for heaven's sake, do not give your ability to pause, discriminate, and decide. Even if it takes 5 days, 10 days, the world will not change, don't worry. Your stock prices may go up and down by a few percentage points, that's fine. But world will wait. But it would have given you the right time for you to weigh the options and take a decision. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Prakash. There is a question from Ravi. Materialistic and spiritual success are 2 ends of a rod. Somewhere I am convinced that you can achieve materialistic success using spiritual principles.
I agree with you.
He's convinced that it can happen, but now the question is, how is what I'm struggling with? I know
Let
it,
me,
but how do I make it happen? Can you please?
I will ask everybody who's watching this session a question, and those who are going to watch it later on YouTube recorded when it floats around. Take a sheet of paper when you watch this segment and write 10 people who have influenced your life since your time of birth. Without any bias. Surprisingly, whenever I've done this exercise in any leadership session, any school session, any college session, which I do a lot as part of Happiness initiatives, etc., or a speaking assignment, people write my mother, my father, my teacher, my neighbor, my so-and-so sportsman. I ask them, why didn't you write the name of Bill Gates or Mukesh Ambani? If those people have been financially so successful, they have been influencing a lot, why didn't you write? Because when you look back at your life, which happened to Alfred Nobel in his lifetime, you look back as that single hyphen which exists between the year of birth and the date of death. That single hyphen is what you give expression to yourself. People have left indelible mark in the human mankind in the last 100, 200 years. If you take a list and compare, in all probability, you will not find one single person who goes into the list where the sheer wealth of the assets that he holds. You may remember Warren Buffett for the advice he has given, not for his bank balance. You may remember Bill Gates for whatever he brought as Microsoft Windows or the changes he effected in how PCs worked, not for his balance sheet. All of us have a very short fuse when it comes to finance, forgetting that the long fuse we all want to have at the end of life is how we lived our life. If you really ask me today, what is my bank balance? I don't know. However small, however large, I don't know. But I do remember the positive emotions, people, special people who impacted in my life. The same is true for each and every one of you. If you keep that as the guiding principle, you will be able to find the stick where spirituality takes over your materials. And let me give one example, quick example for you to get the point. Fundamental reason why Pandavas won the war against Kauravas. They had God on their side. The same is true in 300. The same is true, the movie 300. The same is true in the Red Sea separation. Whatever you take, finally, when God is on your side, who can defeat you? If this simple, leave alone God, if you don't believe in God, take nature. If I'm able to invoke nature, I am able to invoke a higher power. By aligning myself with that, why would I have to worry? A child up to the age of 3, 4 doesn't care whether his father is earning money or not. It knows it will get the money. Up to the age of 5, my daughter used to say, Appa, buy this, and she'd show like this. She thought, take a card, swipe, anything she wants will come, not knowing that there is a factor called money behind it. And she grew up, she knew. It's easy, but we refuse to do. Thank you.
Mr. Prakash, alchemy, you want to touch upon that?
Yeah. How much more time we have for this show?
Priya said she will alert me when we are closer to the time. I have requested her to do that.
Okay.
Maybe another 10 minutes, I would assume. Then we have Mr. Jawhar's hand up. That's the second question that he has. But can you please?
Please.
You want
to ask the question for the sake of the viewers? You have to ask the question.
Okay. So, can you expand on spiritual alchemy, which your book talks about, but then, in the context of the earlier conversation, it would be helpful for the...
See, 25 years ago, I was gifted a book by Paul Coelho called The Alchemist. Many of you must have read it. Very, very rarely a wonderful book about a person who goes into the desert in search of the perfect alchemy and things like that. In very simple terms, alchemy is something which turns something from a lower level to a higher level. A normal metal into gold or platinum or something like that. And there is a catalytic process of not just changing the chemical element of the metal, but it's about transforming or metamorphosizing. If I have to ask you, Mr. Anil, 25, 30 years back when you started your career as a banking executive, would you have ever imagined sitting on top of such a big empire 30 years from then? I don't think so. Maybe 1 in a million will say I had the vision, I grew into that. Maybe yes, but not many. What happened to you with or without your knowledge is the process of what we call as 3-step process: change, transformation, and metamorphosis. Like what happens to a butterfly. It's initially an egg, it becomes a larva, it becomes a caterpillar, and then it works hard and pushes, it becomes a butterfly. If you see a butterfly and somebody told you that this butterfly had come from this egg, I don't think anybody would have ever believed. And every butterfly which became what it was from that egg, this is exactly what I've written in the book, has gone through the process of accepting the change, accepting the transformation into a larva, into a caterpillar, and then metamorphosing into the beautiful, insect, you want to call whatever, beautiful stuff which just flies around. The same happens to every executive without their knowledge. I'm only saying that we can make it a conscious process. A spiritual alchemy is nothing but conscious process of me working on my own DNA, which is nothing but my belief systems, my value systems. How many of us, at least at some point of time, at least in our younger days, would have had those liberal thoughts? I want to change the world. I want to bring this transformation to the world. Every one of us have gone through that. But almost all of us gave up that idea even before we left college. But a few who held that idea went on to become world leaders, saints, great scientists, great mathematicians. Because they never gave up on that, they continuously pushed in a positive way and moved on to transform and finally metamorphosize. The same thing where I share about the story in Mahabharata, where Arjun goes in that 1 year Ajnatavasa, and then he helps the Uttara Kumar, the son of the king, to transform into a warrior who finally migrates to defeat Kaurava single-handedly, of course with the help of Arjuna, just prior to the actual Mahabharata. And then he comes to fight. All along he used to run away even looking at females, leave alone males. And he transformed and metamorphosized into a warrior. He is supposed to have slayed quite a few of them on day 1 or day 2 before actually dying on the second day of Mahabharata. This transformation normally happens through initially an external source. You need someone to come and tell you, like the famous quote of either Pluto or somebody who said, give me a place outside the world, I can push it. I need to be outside for me to push it, not inside. Likewise, many of us need that push, and this book was actually meant for that push to happen mentally to many of the CEOs who are going to read this book. And I hope I partly have answered that question. For the rest of the answer, you may have to read the book.
No, I have.
No, I'm saying I'm talking about the people who are watching.
Mr. Jawahar, you have your hand up.
Maybe that can be the last question.
Yeah.
Closer to the time. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Jawahar.
Sir, amazing session, sir. Thank you so much for all your inputs. Sir, my question is, see, as a CEO, you have to fire people, you have to lay off people for both good and bad reasons. Sometimes they do unethical things and you have to fire people. And then sometimes it's situations like COVID where you have to lay off people. So it's a very tough call. And, there is a thought in my mind that, if I do all these things, I accumulate the karma, right? The bad karma inside me. So how do I get over this thought, sir? Can you give me some insights?
I came across about 3 case studies in the last 1 month, specifically in the second wave pandemic, which has hit businesses very hard. I was really amazed reading some of the success stories which is there in Economic Times, Times of India, all these magazines, including some web portals, have carried the stories of a few corporates. They knew they had to give up on certain people over a period of time. One of them took a conscious call that till they get an alternate job, they'll fund their families. the other company went in locating jobs for these people elsewhere. One more organization helped them to actually become entrepreneurs by funding them, saying that keep this money, give it back whenever possible. One of the CEOs I know of, I was speaking to, who also did this in a very small way, he was saying, Prakash, money will come, money will go. But the karma of having left people who are with me in good times is something I don't want to carry. So the one way to purify karma is always to show compassion, as my guru says. If I was the person who is being fired, what would I expect? And see if I can fulfill. See, when you approach things with a compassionate heart, with a merciful heart, with a heart which understands empathetically what the other person is going through, they also know the pain that you are going through. Many of the organizations where some people have been eavesdropped, where we're coaching them or consulting with them, the executives are being left out or asked to leave. We used to get counseling from me. I used to tell them that it is mutual. It's not deliberate that you're throwing people out. So as I mentioned at the beginning, karma starts with a thought. Instead of the thought that you're firing somebody, just have the thought that you are helping them to get something better. That might ease the pain for you, for them as well. Be in touch, maybe make a visit, make a call to them. Find a way in which you can, in some way, see, financial inclusion in your balance sheet P&L need not be looked only at one quarter in these pandemic times. Some of the organizations I have known have deep pockets where they've kept certain money aside for such events. I remember a very large industrial house with whom I do a lot of work. In the first wave, for 3 months, they had to shut down the factory. Very large organization in India. They're in the top 500 of Indian, I don't want to name. But what they did is for these 3 months, they paid the salary in full, though the factory was closed. So the managing director is a good friend of mine. I do a lot of work with them. So I asked him, so-and-so, why did he do this? He said, it's very simple. They have been with me for 5, 10, 15 years. Won't I do that for my own brother and sister? It was a big P&L call he had to personally take. He was an employee MD. He was not a owner MD. He grew up from the ranks to become the managing director of the organization. And from the reopening time after the first wave, in less than 2 months, the staff went out of the way to market and produce and do things which are amazing, where he wiped off all the 3 months of HR costs that he had to pay, though that was not his idea. But in this case, what would be the good karma or the bad karma you imagine for yourself? For every problem that we face, there are positive way of 50, 100 ways of solving that. It's for us to discriminate. As I said in the beginning, we have the ability to discriminate, have viveka. It's up to us. I hope you answered your question. Back to you, Mr. Anil. I think we're hitting the...
Almost done. Yeah. Last point, not as a question. Not as a
Maybe
question.
you want to summarize something, you can feel free.
No, just before that. You mentioned something about a webinar on 20th June.
Yes.
You want to quickly mention about it? It should the viewers have.
It's a webinar on what I call as karma quotient in business success, the same topic I've taken here, which actually would share about 6, I would say, indigenously developed frameworks by us, Sea Change, which would help people to actually implement. Here I'm giving you the need to have the balance of karma quotient and all that. There I exactly share. Today is, in fact, round 1 where the closing happens at a discounted rate. From tomorrow, it's marginally higher. The session happens on 20th of June. It's there on my LinkedIn handle and all those stuff. Look for Corporate Yogi, search on LinkedIn. You'll find all this stuff. You'll be able to register. Something which will really help. We already have hundreds of people registered for it. We look forward to a session on Sunday between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. IST. Thanks for asking that question, Mr. Anil.
Thank you, Mr. Prakash. I couldn't agree more on all the points that got discussed, and thanks to the audience for keeping the session live and engaging. I must confess that I had come prepared with some backup questions, but I didn't have to dip into those because the audience had far too many questions to ask. Thanks for that. Again, as it happened with our dress code, which is coincidental, both of us have turned up to be like, brothers.
White coats.
I couldn't agree more with all the points that were made. And for me, the book Spiritual CEO is a manifestation of several of the principles that you had come about during our wonderful coaching sessions.
Yes.
We had a lot. So thank you very much for taking out time, and thanks to TiE Chennai for bringing together this program and making some of these principles known to the wider leadership group. As always, TiE Chennai brings the best to the members. So on that note, back to you, Priya.
And maybe I will also thank the audience, thank TiE Chennai, thank Mr. Anil, thank Westland for helping TiE to come out to this program and do whatever is needed. Really a wonderful session. From the participation, it did look that people are enjoying it. Not many people walked out of the Zoom call, though, so that's a very clear sign. And for the excellent moderation you've done, Mr. Anil, we do carry a lot of memories, and the resonance today is so good that both of us turned up literally at the same time. Thanks once again to TiE Chennai.